Hey, how's it going? Are you able to hear me? How you doing, Mel? All right, how many people we got on here? Got Angela, Mel, Mike. Are all you guys able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
I can hear you.
All right, all right. So we're going to get into a little bit tonight is we're going to touch base on a little bit of the policy, right? So one of the first things that as an adjuster, once you get what they assign you the claim and you get a loss notice. Once you get that loss notice, then it's like, hey, how do I determine coverage? So if you guys go to that on the school site, I put the dwelling form. That is the guidelines of residential dwellings, right? So if you want to, we're gonna reference a couple of those pages as we go through this, and I'm gonna try to keep this pretty short. We'll do it for about 30 minutes, and then I'll open it up to questions, and we should be buttoned up in about 45 minutes total. So I appreciate you guys jumping on. I'm looking to do this maybe possibly every couple of weeks, just to kind of give you guys some information as we're getting into flood season. If you guys notice, Hawaii is getting some flooding right now, so we may hear something on that tomorrow. But it's to get you guys prepared because something could happen from literally this time of the year to the rest of the year, right? Like usually January, February is really slow. March, we start seeing thunderstorms. April gets really active. May gets active. And then we get into June and July, which we're going to hit into hurricane season. Then anything can happen at that time. And then August, September, October are your peak times for hurricane season. That's when if something's going to happen, it's going to typically happen in that period of time. But you want to be ready for springtime flooding. And so how do you get ready, right? It's getting into getting into this, right? And understanding what the policy is. So one of the first things is what we're going to talk about is pre-firm and post-firm, right? So I'm gonna share my slides here. Everybody able to see that? All right. So what is pre-firm and post-firm, right? Let's see. So pre-firm is kind of think of it this way, right? The kind of the easiest ways I can explain it is if you go into somebody's house and they give you a loss notice, pre-firm, what does that mean? That means that you're going to look at the date of construction of when they built that house. Say that they built that house in 1985. Well, FEMA went out there sometime in the 70s. If that neighborhood was active and if that house was built after that time. So FEMA goes out there, say December 10th, 1972, right? Anything built after 1972 has to meet minimum requirements of how they're going to have to build that home in that area. So a lot of it determines on flood zones, determines on what they map out the area as. But so a pre-firm and post-firm. So the big thing is on pre-firm, it means that pre is before FEMA went out to map out the area. So if that house was built in 1965 and FEMA came out in 1972 and mapped out the area, that is what they consider pre. That house was pre-existing before FEMA went out there. So we when we say pre, it's really mean we're grandfathered in. So even if FEMA went out there and they said in 1972, it's like, hey, this whole area is like a high risk flood zone. That's fine. The house was built in 1965. So that means even though it's a flood zone, if something happens to that house because it was built in 1965, it's grandfathered in. So if it floods, they are fully 100% protected. Doesn't matter if they come in and they say, hey, everything from 1972 on has to be built 10 feet, 20 feet elevated. You can't have anything underneath. If that house was built on slab and it was before 1972 is when they were out there, well, then it doesn't matter. That house is still protected. Now, if they went out there in 1972 and they built that house in 1985, right? And it was supposed to be elevated and they didn't elevate it, well, then it, that house isn't going to have protection the same way. And so we're going to get into all of that and explain what pre-firm versus post-firm is. We're going to get into a little bit of the flood zones. I'm going to help you guys determine what is a flood zone and what is not a flood zone. So we'll get into that. And then we'll get into some questions as we get through some of these slides. There's not a whole lot of them, just about six or seven. And then we'll get into so I can help explain it a little bit better. But this is one of the first things that you want to learn as an adjuster. What is pre-firm and what is post-firm? So when you take that NFIP class, they're going to be harping a lot about pre-firm and post-firm. You'll have a pretty good idea what they're talking about. So again, pre-firm is built before the community's first flood insurance rate map. That just means that the house was built before FEMA actually went out there and mapped out the area. It doesn't have any elevation requirements. They're lenient on the coverage rules, and a post-firm is something that was built after they established the area, and it must follow elevation and floodplain regulations, and coverage is more restricted and structured. So understanding what an AE zone. So an AE zone is one of the most popular flood zones that you're going to see, right? So if there's a home in a flood zone, you're typically going to see it's an A zone or an AE zone or even a V zone, right? Those are your most common ones. Depending on the area of the country that they're in, how old it is, that's where they're going to determine what the flood zone is. So base flood elevation, or what they consider as BFE. So on this house, if you're looking here, there FEMA comes out and they determine this BFE, this line across the screen right here, that is what they consider the base flood elevation. So every house has to begin at this area, right? If anybody's familiar with insurance, they're going to ask what an EC is, an elevation certificate. What is the elevation certificate for this home? And if they pull that elevation certificate and they say, oh, elevation certificate is showing that it's supposed to be 10 foot high elevated, before you get to the first elevated building, right? So everything underneath this. So you'll see a lot of houses like this, and we deal with a lot of houses like this where we'll go out on beach communities and you'll see all of this. Well, the reason that it's built this way is so that this water can run in and run back out. But what you'll see, especially in the Northeast or in some older communities, is that after so long, and all of this was built like this originally, people will come back in and they will build this entire thing out and use it as living space. They take their own risk by doing that and what they call a post-firm elevated building, right? So if they're in a flood zone and they were required to build up this way, and they were built after FEMA came out there and mapped out the area, and they built it and they built all this back in. Well, none of this is going to be covered when we go out there because their coverage starts here at the first elevated floor. So when I have those conversations and I go out there, I'm like, and they're like, yeah, I lost everything, drywall, and then you'll go out there and there'll be beautiful houses, and all of this is built in because they use it as living space. There'll be another living room, there'll be another kitchen. You'll see game rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, all of it, right? And then these floods come in and wash it all away or just tear it apart, right? They're not covered. The only thing that is covered is mechanicals, which is going to be our electric panel, electric outlets, AC units, things of that nature. Everything else, doors, carpet, flooring, drywall, paint, none of it's covered. So now say you see the same exact house and it's in a X zone, right? Well, then that X zone means an X means there is no restrictions. So you have AE zone that there is restrictions on a post firm. Now keep that in mind. AE zone or flood zone, they have to be in a if they're post firm. Say this same house was in a pre-firm. Say they built this house in 1965, the flood map came out there in 1972, then everything would be covered. And the reason I want to go over all this with you guys is because this is the part that a lot of people get confused on, especially when they're first starting. They have a lot of hard times wrapping their head around what we're saying, and even when I'm explaining it, it can be confusing, right? But if this same house was built and it's a pre-firm and it was built before the FEMA went out there and mapped it, and it floods, we can cover all of it. If it's a post firm and it's in a flood zone and they're supposed to be elevated, we can't cover any of it. That's the most simplest way I can explain it. So pre is before and post is bad. So post has restrictions, pre doesn't. All right, so we have flood structure and zone guides, right? So again, we talked about pre-firm. Typically, you'll see a lot of slab on grade on pre-firm buildings. Um, you'll see a pre-firm elevated, as I was just explaining. That home was built before FEMA came out there and mapped it out. The other thing is, and this is where a lot of people will get confused right here, is they'll be like, hold on, it's a post firm, but it's slab on grade, right? If it's slab on grade, the house is covered because it's not elevated. They did not determine that it had to be elevated in that area, right? They didn't put an elevation certificate that said, hey, it's got to be elevated so high. The house is slab on grade. Even though it might be a post firm, it's still going to have coverage. And if it floods 6 inches, we're going to cover all of it, right? But one of the things that you'll see, and you guys will go through a lot of this with the NFIP training, is like, say, if you're looking at this house that says post firm and slab on grade, one of the things that we see a lot is the house might be on slab, but the garage will have some elevation to it. And so that garage coverage won't start until maybe like sometimes 6 feet, right? So it's just the that just goes from learning all of it and then seeing it and all of that. That's all just going to take practice and understanding. Even when I was out in Florida for Helene, the way that they built these condos, I would look at it. I'm like, that is a post-firm elevated building because I see the way the garage is. I can see the pilings holding these things up, and they just built a drywall around it. But I know something's holding this up, right? Um, and I would write them as post-firm elevated buildings and not cover the things in the garage because the garage was the only thing that got wet in that house. Because you would go into the garage and then you would take 4 steps up. Why would you need to take 4 steps up? Is because that garage that needed the rest of the house had to be elevated some, right? So, and then the last one here is post firm elevated. And remember, I was just telling you guys how they'll come in and they'll build out the whole bottom. Well, if you look at the pilings that are in the front right here, there's 5 of them, right? One, two, three, four, five. That is what's holding up this entire structure upstairs, right? So what these people did is they came in after a while, or they built it that way, and they went ahead and built all this living space. But those pilings are going all through that bottom floor, and so everything they built down here in a post-firm elevated building, and if it's in a flood zone, right? If it's an X zone, they're okay. But if they're in a flood zone, it's not going to have coverage. Why? And then we get into what is a firm map and why did the NFIP create it, right? So the NFIP came out in the 70s, and really they went out and anything before December 31st, 1974, anything that was built before that date is covered because that's when FEMA had went out. They started doing all their mapping, and they put they drew a line in the sand, and they said, you know what? We've mapped out most of the United States. We have a pretty good idea of what is a flood zone and what is not. So they're going to say December 31st, 1974. Anybody before that date is going to have coverage. We're just going to draw it there. Anything from January 1st, 1975 and on is going to have to follow the guidelines and follow the rules, right? So the reason that they had to do that is because obviously homes were being flooded. People had to have coverage. They were coming in. They're like, okay, we got to have some kind of determination of when we're telling these builders how to build, they've got to build to guidelines and they got to build to the code restrictions in the area and make sure that we're not putting people in harm's way by building these houses that are going to get swept away anytime it rains or a hurricane comes in, right? So that they mandated it, like all of this is mandated by Congress, right? So they made what they call the firm map, FIRM, which is the flood insurance rate map, is what they call it. And then it will tell them you know exactly what area you're in when you buy your house. If you ask for flood insurance, they're going to say, "Hey, what flood zone are you in?" They're going to look it up. They're going to pull up the firm map and see where you're at. And if you are in a flood zone, well, then you need to pay for flood insurance, especially if you have a mortgage. If you have a mortgage, before you close on that mortgage, they're going to check to make sure you're not in a flood zone. And if you are, you're going to have flood insurance to be able to get that loan. And again, your high risk flood zones are going to be AE, is which the most common. So when you'll see a lot, you'll see A's, you'll see a V, right? And VE. Those are all high risk. And then an X zone, you're in the clear. Like I'm X, I don't care what kind of house I have, I'm good to go. Here's a pre-firm example. We got concrete slab ground level, typically in moderate to high risk flood zones they can be. And this has the most lenient, right? The lenient rules. Like again, everything is covered. If this thing floods, no matter what, I'm going to cover every bit of it, right? Like no, as long as it says, if as long as it's a pre-firm, we are good to go. So if the house was built 1985, FEMA came in 1987 and mapped that area, they beat the area, right? They're pre-firm. So it doesn't matter how they built their house. A post-firm example. This is what I was talking about, right? So even though it's slab on grade and it's post-firm, we're still going to be able to cover this house, even though it's post-firm, because it's not elevated. If any part of this home was elevated, then like this garage, I was saying, this garage, if the house walked in and you had to take steps from this point of the column in the garage, and you walked in the garage here, and then you took steps to go upstairs to the first floor, even if it was just three or four, then the home is elevated. It's just elevated on a thick slab, or it's elevated with a small crawl space. But it's elevated. So anything below that elevation wouldn't be covered. And so in this instance, if that was the case, the garage wouldn't have coverage unless it went past that point. And then at that point, did it go into the house? Well, then the house would have coverage. And again, these are typically the flood zone is AE, V, VE, X zone. You don't have to worry. Okay, improperly enclosed post firm example. So again, we talked about this one earlier. They have the four columns in the front, but these columns are going all the way through. So if this thing floods, and more than likely on this home, the only thing that's going to flood is going to be everything down here in this garage area. They're not going to have coverage. The only thing that's going to have coverage is going to be your AC units, your electrical panel, your electrical outlets, water heaters. Um, that's it, right? Because the way FEMA looks at this, even though you can see it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's not there. In FEMA's eyes, yeah, you built it, it's there. But in FEMA's eyes, all they see are the pilings that's holding up the home. So they're like, that's why they're not paying for anything. And one of the dead giveaways whenever you walk up to a home like this is if they have an AC unit, they'll have the condenser up high. And if you see that condenser up high, the homeowner knows that he has restricted coverage here. He may play dumb with you, but he knows because why else would his AC unit be that high? All right, so we've talked about pre-firm, post-firm, slab foundations, and elevated foundations, right? So when in doubt, you always want to check the firm dates. The biggest thing is when you look at date of construction, that's going to be your determination to what is going to happen after that, right? Because when they send us the loss notice, they say, hey, this is your date of construction, 1/1/1991. And then it's going to have the firm date underneath that. That firm date, if it's before 1/1/1991, well, then you know that that home, no matter how it's built, is a post firm. Now, is it a post firm in an X zone? Is it a post firm in an AE zone or high risk flood zone? Then that's where when you go out to do your inspection, that's what you've got to determine. You got to determine, okay, what coverage do they have? What information am I going to need? And then you want to gauge that insured and say, hey, can I have this conversation with them here? Or do I need to have this conversation once I leave on the telephone? Right? Because that's the other side of it. It's like, are they crazy or are they on the nerve that they're really stressed out? And I'm about to tell them, hey, I know your house has been destroyed, but nothing's covered. And so sometimes we want to wait for those conversations to happen offsite. If if you can gauge it and you can read it, then you can kind of give them a hint and say, hey, you know that all of this is water supposed to just run through and run back out. So there isn't much coverage down here. And I'm gonna be able to pay to clean it up, which is some flood loss cleanup. I'm gonna be able to dry out your columns that are holding up the house. And I'm gonna be able to pay for any electrical outlets. And if your panel got damaged, we'll be able to pay for that. We'll be able to pay for your water heater if it's down here, your condenser if it's down here. But that's pretty much it. There isn't much more to pay for, right? So those claims become really small, but they come really quick to go out there. You inspect it, you can write it really fast in less than an hour, and then you submit it and get paid. But that's a lot of it. You just got to remember when NFIP has the class with you guys, and they're talking about BFE and low BFE, they're talking about base flood elevation, right? So base flood elevation is where did FEMA determine that they needed to build these homes up to? And then questions about all of that, about flood zones, about slab, pre-firm, post-firm. We'll open it up to that and we'll get into it here. So I get this off here. All right, guys. So we did have quite a few people. All right. So any questions that I can clear up about that? Nobody? Does everybody here understand what pre-firm and post-firm means? Does that help understand like, hey, because I mean that is a big one it's a big one. And either a lot of people get it or a lot of people don't get it. And it'll throw them for a loop, especially on their first storm. You just got to remember pre-firm is always before they came out there, and post-firm is always after they came out there. Pre-firm, they're grandfathered in, doesn't matter if their house is elevated or not. Post-firm is going to be, there's going to be restrictions if they're in a flood zone and they are elevated. So you'll hear us talk about, is it a post-firm elevated building? If it's a post firm elevated building, there's going to be restrictions. If it's a post firm on slab, then they're in an AE zone. They won't have restrictions because I mean they're on slab, so we're going to be able to cover it. But a post firm elevated, that's the part that you've got to really understand and determine. Post firm elevated, get that down. But what are the things that are covered in a post firm elevated building, right? Like we talked about it. Outlets, AC condenser units, the electric panel. We can pay for some cleaning. There's typically around 17 items, which matches what a basement is, about almost the exact same thing as a basement. If you are looking through the guidelines and it's telling you here's 17 things in a basement, a post firm elevated building is about the exact same thing. There's a couple of differences, but that's it, right? Like in a basement, they'll let you, if they had drywall, they'll let you take the drywall off and put the drywall back, but it's going to be unpainted, unfinished. In a post frame elevated building, they will not let you put drywall back up. So that's one of the differences between basement restrictions and a post frame elevated building. And you'll see that in the dwelling, like when it lists out the 17 items. Any questions on that? Somebody's got to be
So, Mike,
confused.
are the stairs and the stairs and the decking leading up to that first floor, is that covered?
If it's the only way into the home, they will cover
Uh-huh.
the stairs and then 16 feet of the decking.
Okay. What about an elevator on that?
An elevator, those are typically not covered. An elevator had to have been installed in the home before, I think it's September 30th, 1987. If an elevator was put
Okay.
in before then it can have coverage. If it's after that, then all we're going to cover is the actual cab, the thing that you actually walk into, and then the button
Hmm.
that you hit. But none of the things that make it operate, we're going to cover.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so who here can tell me what a post firm elevated building is? Just need one person. What characteristics of a post firm elevated building, what would that look like?
So built after 1974 or
Possibly. But what
okay,
does the actual structure typically look like?
the home on stilts?
Correct. Yeah, that's kind of a dead giveaway, right? That's if you notice that the house is elevated, then the first thing you want to make sure is this pre-firm or post-firm? That should be the first thing that you ask yourself, right? Home is elevated on we call them pilings, but stilts is another name. But or even if it's just on a small crawl space, right? That you should ask yourself very quickly is this post or pre? Because if it's pre and it's even just a small crawl space, all the like people will put pickets or whatever all around the bottom, well then those will be covered. But if it's post, none of that exists, right? So if they have the other thing that will be covered if they have like ducking from HVAC ducking down there, they'll cover that. But everything else under there, not covered, especially like people that have contents, which is another big part of it. People will stick stuff underneath their house, like lawnmowers and things of that nature. Well, then none of that's going to have any coverage if it's post firm. If it's pre firm, we're going to be able to cover it. Now, if it's post firm and it's slab on grade, what
That's the one I'm
restrictions
not
will
clear
there be?
on.
That's the one you're not clear on, right?
Yeah,
That's the
so
one
it's
that,
just a different level flood zone. It can still be.
yeah. So that's the one that confuses everybody. because
Okay.
they're like, hold on, you're saying post firm and it has restrictions, but then this one's post firm, but it's slab.
Hmm.
It's like, why doesn't it have any restrictions? Because that's how they built that house, right? They built it on it's not elevated, it's slab foundation, um, and they'll do coverage for it.
Okay.
So the biggest things when you're walking out there is like, hey, you see slab, it's always good to go back and look. Now, one of the things you'll see is you'll see a post firm elevated building, and then you'll see a detached garage to that house. And the detached garage will be on slab, but the house is elevated on pilings, right? And so you're like, well, does this garage have coverage? Because it's not elevated. It will, but coverage has to start above that flood line, the base flood elevation zone, right? So you kind of have to go out there and say, okay, that's when you can pull an elevation certificate and say, hey, okay, this is where I can start coverage here. If it went past that, then I can cover it. So on an X zone, what does an X zone mean? If they hit the little raise your hand thing if you know it. Okay, an X zone means that there is no restriction. So if you go walk up to a house and it's on stilts, but it's in an X zone, you just go like this. Yes. Like we got coverage.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh man, you're good. You're X. Like I don't have to have the tough conversation with this guy. I don't have to break their heart. Um, like we're good. I can write this just like I write any normal claim. It's whenever I see that AE or V or A that I'm like, man, here we go. Right. And the biggest thing is definitely up north and some of these old beach communities have been around for a long time and nothing's happened. Like I think it was Maine and New Hampshire that we were in, and nothing's happened there for a really long time. And this little bitty hurricane goes up there and it floods it out. And so all that area was all those houses that are built on stilts were all built in and they used it as living space. A lot of people use it as like a additional, like a mother-in-law suite. None of it's covered. And just because it's like, hey, you knew the risk, you were post firm and you built it in anyway. Like now, if you'd have been pre firm, we're not having this conversation. But since you're a post firm and this is elevated and then you decided to build it in, it's not covered. And it'll confuse you too walking up to it because you think it's on slab. You have to go in and you have to walk it. And one of the things is like, all right, how's it built? Because there's 2 or 3 stories above you, right? And you're like, you're looking in the wall. And then you notice it's like when I walked up, I noticed that there was a column or a piling. I'm like, and there was one in the middle outside holding up the front porch. That means there's got to be one, they got to have a bunch of them running through the middle to hold all this up. How is the second and the third story being held up without falling if it's not a concrete slab foundation? So but that's one of the things you have to go and you have to look and determine. And it's like, all right, and it'll confuse the best of us, right? Um, on both ways. But it's just you got to go in there and look for it. Yeah, because when they rip all that out, you'll see those round columns in there, and and that's the biggest thing. It's like, hey, when you rip all this out, send me photos. I want to see what's holding it up. The other one, if it's not on pilings, they'll use block foundation walls, right? So the whole perimeter is just a block foundation wall that is holding up the entire structure. So it's elevated on block foundation wall. We had a lot of that in Florida where they're just older, they were all built on block foundation wall. So who here really understands the flood zones? So when you're learning this, just get the flood zones down. Um, Once you got the flood zones down, you can look at that loss notice and say, all right, this is an X zone, this is an AE zone. And the next question is it post-firm or pre-firm? And let me see if I'm going to share my screen. I'll show you guys a loss notice. I'll pull one up. All right, so this is a loss notice here. And this is just random. I just grabbed a guy to do it. So the first thing I'm going to look down here is I'm looking at all his coverage. I'm looking at the insured here. This is the insured, and then this is the property location. Is what all that I see right there. The next thing is I want to come down here to occupancies, the single family house. Down here it says elevated, and it says no, right? But it says zone AE. So he's in a flood zone, but he's not elevated. Right? And I'm like, okay, well then I don't have to worry about anything there because he's not elevated, but he is in a flood zone. The date of construction was 7/1/1979. So that's when they built this house. FEMA, the firm date was 6/18/1971. So he's a post firm in a flood zone, but since he's not elevated, we're good. He's going to have full coverage. So this is where you would get that information. So as now that I've been out there and I looked at the gentleman's house, and let's see, look at some of our photos here. So you see his house is just slab on grade, right? Yep, just it's not elevated at all. There's his AC unit. We're looking for the sticker. The sticker wore off, right? So we couldn't get the sticker. We got that sticker on another one though. And there's the homeowner. But he's got these columns here, but we can tell that this home is just on slab. There's his garage. But even though he's post firm and he's in a flood zone, he still has coverage just because he's on slab. If he was elevated, then he would have restricted coverage on the part that is below the elevation. So say he was elevated. Say he was elevated to this window. Let's say all of this was crawl space and he flooded and it got past this window. He would have coverage still just because the floodwaters went over the crawl space area. And that was the part that was elevated. Everything underneath this crawl space wouldn't have coverage unless it was what we consider cleaning or mechanical. So does that help any a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope I can get
What was those dates again?
which dates?
For post firm and pre firm?
Well, the national pre-firm date is 12/31/1974.
1974.
That's so anything built before 12/31/1974 is gonna automatically be pre-firm.
Okay.
It's gonna have full coverage, right? After that date, you gotta determine it's like, hey, if it was built, after whatever date that they came out there and mapped the area. So the area that I live in, they mapped out in 1986. So my house was built in 2014. I'm not in a flood zone, but I would be considered post firm because they built the house after, 20 years, whatever, 18 years after FEMA came out here and mapped it.
Okay.
So, so like my house is a post firm in an X zone, which means I'm not in a flood zone, but I am post firm. All right, so we are 42 minutes after. Not bad. Any questions on anything that you guys want to talk about? I'm wide open. How are you guys coming along with how are you coming along on the training mill? How you doing with it?
Did you say did you say Mel?
Yeah, Melvin.
Uh I'm coming along. I
Okay.
need the other assignments.
Okay.
You said you were gonna put
Are
them
you
on something. I forgot.
okay? Yeah, just get with me after and I'll show you.
Okay.
So anybody else on here, how are you guys looking to want to jump into the classroom? And then secondly, it's like what I do want to touch base and kind of start, preparing you guys as much as possible. So jump on here every couple of weeks. We'll talk about a different subject. One of the big things is really understanding the guidelines, right? Because that makes things so much easier to understand the entire policy. And you'll go over it on with the NFIP class. It's a 6-hour class. It's a lot of data. So we'll try to break out little pieces of it that I feel like are the most important. This is one of the big ones, post firm and pre firm. This is one, if you can get your head around this, then that's going to help you out a long way. The rest of it is we'll get into talking about basements and what's covered in a basement, what makes up a basement, because those are claims that we do often. And so if a house is below grade on all four sides, it's considered a basement, whatever that step down is. And then that's going to have restricted coverage. So we'll get into all of that in another time. We'll get into contents, we'll get into exterior buildings, we'll get into sheds. And that way, when you guys do have a claim, you'll understand the rules. And if you understand the rules, you can write the claim.
How about a deck?
A deck is not a part of the home.
Okay.
Okay. The deck with the stairs will cover up to 16 feet.
Mm-mm.
So we'll walk into houses and you walk up the stairs and then they wrap around porches, not covered,
Okay. Even the one in the backyard,
even
eight
in the
feet.
backyard.
All right.
Yeah. Like they'll cover, said the stairs if the stairs are damaged, and then 16 feet of that deck. And we had it where the whole deck gets tore off and we cover 16 feet of it
All right.
because they need a landing, right? They got to have a space to be able to walk into the house.
Yeah.
That's why they cover the 16 feet. Did anybody learn anything?
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, Melvin, Angela, Dimitri, Earl, Maria. Hey, Naomi. Naomi knows all this stuff, but she likes to listen. So who's close to signing up for the classroom? Did everybody that's on this call, did you guys get signed up for the NFIP class? Did anybody not?
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the things that we're seeing is, and I think I noticed it last week, Tuesday or Wednesday, is that all the classes were full for the rest of the year. Now I don't know if that's because they're still in the government shutdown and they just took them offline. But if your class gets canceled, don't worry. Like they're gonna have to open up more classes. Because as of right now, all of us that are in this, only whoever took it on February 19th is the only people that have been through the class. And I still haven't received my certificate from that class yet, right? Which tells me that since the government shut down and until they get that back up and running, then it's kind of, I guess they're on hold because nobody's working it. Um, which is a big question is like, okay, what happens? Because they can't leave all these people with flood insurance just, sorry, government shutdown, right? Doesn't work that way. So I know that they're pushing to try to get it reopened, but my guess, and then after seeing some stuff from the NFIP this week, some of the guys inside there, they're basically saying, don't stress out. It'll be fine. We've been through this before, right? We went through it last year a little bit. We went through it like 2 years ago, where they had the government shut down and then they had to come back and add some more classes. So my guess is that's what they're going to do. It's hard to do those classes it's hard enough to do them every 2 days. I can't see them doing them every day to try to get everybody caught up. So I could see them like probably just adding more in June and July and because they gotta have everybody situated and going for the next year. I know it was 2 or 3 years ago, it might have been during Hurricane Ian, that none of us got to take the class. And they just what they did with our licenses is they just went ahead and just went back retroactively and just reactivated them for that year. Even though we didn't get a new card, we used our old cards. And then what they did is when that storm hit, they had like classes that whole week, and they were just getting people in the
Mhm.
system. And then as soon as all they had to show was that they took the class and take a screenshot of the last slide, and then that they would send that into the adjusting firm, and that let them work. So yeah, if you see that, don't stress out about it too much. It's going to happen. But I just want to throw that out there because even all of us, who haven't taken the classes, like they're going to need us if something happens. And in fact, we got stuff going on in Hawaii right now. I was seeing like people send a lot of videos. They've been shooting that to me, and I'm like, again, it's one of those things that if you were on the webinar, I kind of talked about briefly. Is like whenever you see those events, kind of just take it with a grain of salt because the news tends to show the worst, right? And so you'll look at that and you'll get real, and I used to do it all the time, but I'll get super excited and pumped. I'm like, oh man, we got something, right? Like even yesterday, my wife's like, "Oh, you get to go to Hawaii?" It's like, I'm not going to Hawaii. I go, if you look at it, it looks like a lot of street flooding. I go, and if they're showing that, that's the worst part of it. I'm like, but there's three things of that in that storm. One is 95% of the people in Hawaii don't have flood insurance. So you only have like 61,000 policies in effect, period, throughout all of Hawaii. So that's not a whole lot of policies. And then it's hitting, I think it was North Aha or however you say that. So it's hitting a very small area. Now they did say that the dam may give, which then will cause a lot more flooding, right? That'll be an unprecedented event for them. But if that were to happen, well, then we'll see. But as of right now, any claims that come in, we'll hear a little bit about it tomorrow and say, yeah, we got a few claims, but it's not huge. And we'll give them to the guys that are locally in Hawaii. If it's a big event and that dam breaks, and now you have 40,000 people, well, then they need a lot of adjusters to go do that. So, but always take those events until you can see it, or you're watching TikTok and people are underwater in their house and it's widespread, then you know it's real. Until then, like just like, hey, I'll just wait and see what happens or wait and see what I hear. Don't pack your bags yet. That's all I'm saying. But cool. Anybody else have any questions about anything? Anything about the training? Anything about flood policy? Anything about how the NFIP works? Anything I confused you guys on?
Everything.
All of it, huh? Just the so you guys know what pre-firm and post-firm mean now, right?
All right.
So that's a big one. Know your flood zones, learn your flood zones, and know what pre-firm, post-firm is. Post-firm elevated, like put that in your memory. Post-firm elevated should ring a red flag of restrictions. Means the house is elevated and it's in post-firm. If you see that, then you proceed with caution.
Could we get a copy of those slides?
Yeah, I'll throw them on the school site.
Okay, thanks.
So, how do you guys like the school site so far? Looks like it's up to 80 something members. It's it's starting to slowly, starting to get word a little bit getting out. But be cool to get that, like push that out to anybody that you're looking to that wants to learn more about this. And any news that I hear, I'll put it on there. You guys can see. I did put something about Hawaii on there. So tomorrow morning, I've sent a couple emails and I was texting with my examiner yesterday about it. And this goes to tell you that it's not on anybody's radar because when I texted my examiner, he goes, "Oh, really?" He goes, "It's flooding." Yeah. So if my examiner doesn't even realize that it's flooding, then nobody within the company is saying anything to them. It hasn't reached that level yet. But all right, guys. Well, thank you for coming on Sunday and reach out to me. Hit me up on the school site, put a message up there, and then let's grow that community. But like I said, lean on each other. Any questions you guys have, throw them on there. I'm always open to answer any questions you guys put up.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Thanks,
You
Mike.
too.
Thank you.